Hi everyone, welcome back to the studio. If you're new here, I'm Tammy at Tam's Creative Corner, and today I'm going to try my first ever sunset resin seascape. So I got inspired by watching Petra and Scarlett on their YouTube channels do a collaboration of a sunset seascape sort of thing. And after I watched those, I just knew I had to try it. I'm going to start on a small panel just because I have no idea what I'm doing and I want to be able to play around and not worry if I mess it up. And if it all works out, I might do a bigger one. So if you want to join me on this adventure, let's get started. I often get asked how I prep my wood board, so I thought I'd add that to the first part of this video. Just use any kind of wood sealer. I've got them linked in my description below or in my Amazon shop. I usually use a Minwax, but I ran out of that, so I'm using this instead. Make sure you get that sealer into all the cracks and crevices, and what it'll do is it'll help keep the bubbles in your resin from coming up and also seal your board from warping. So I usually do about 3 layers of this on my top and sides and even sometimes along the back of my board. And then after that's done, I move on and I tape off the back of my board so that when I do resin and those drips fall down, I can easily pull them off later. And just taking a wooden stick, I rub the tape onto the board to create a nice seal. And don't forget to level your board. That's a huge thing when you're working in fluid arts and you don't want to have all of your resin or paints flow off to the side after you work so hard on them. My friend Patty recommended this blue tape to create a seal on my panel so that my resin wouldn't flow into the next part. Because of the way I'm trying to design this, I needed that separation. Now I'm using various pigments from different companies. They'll all be listed below for you, but I like to mix and match my colors. And I also used a little bit of alcohol ink in my gold just to get the tone I was after. And don't worry if this is going too fast for you. All of the supplies I used are listed in the description below my video. You might have to click read more or that little drop down arrow and it'll open the whole box up and show you all the goodies. I don't know if it's just because it's so soothing, but I love to just get my hands in there and work my resin with my fingers. I mean, it's kind of like finger painting for adults. So you can see I'm trying to create kind of an abstract sunset sky. That's why I put that little blob of gold in the middle. And then I'm going to go back in with the alcohol ink and add a drop. Kind of just experimenting and playing as usual. Then with my heat gun, I'm going to go in and start warming up this resin and moving it around on the board. And then with my little culinary torch, I give it a little bit more intense heat because I want to see what else I can do with this. See what effects might come out of it and move my resin around a little more. My main tools when I'm working a resin pour are my culinary torch and my heat gun. And they're always sitting next to me because I never know which one I'm going to grab and need. The heat gun's great for moving the resin around, and the torch is great for popping bubbles and also bringing out some more effects in your resin. You can see that I go in with my culinary torch just to soften the lines that I just put in. That's also a great way to use that tool. Once I'm satisfied, I put this away to cure, and here's what it looks like before I put it into my cure station. It's kind of cool, very abstract, but I like the color tones. I give this a couple days to cure and then I remove that tape. Really impressed with how this tape held up. There were a couple of spots, but it was my own fault because I left a little gap there on the edge and it did seep under. So I know what to do better next time. I went ahead and scraped that off. Didn't have to scrape off too much because I'm just going to paint right over this. And then I reapplied that same tape to cover up my sunset part so I didn't accidentally get any of the sea onto the sunset. I decide I want to go ahead and paint the base layer of my Seascape part. That way I have something to fall back on, and it's kind of like giving me a rough draft before I apply my resin. So I'm using Arteza metallics and they're amazing. I love this set of paints. They have so many colors. Oh, and there will be a link below if you'd like to try them out with a discount code for a limited time. So check that out. Anyway, I apply my paints in a gradient fashion, and you'll see I'm doing this by putting my paint down on my plate in horizontal rows against each other. And then when I dip my paintbrush in, I dip it in vertically. That way when I paint it on the board, it kind of gives that gradient pattern, which is kind of a cool effect when you're doing seascapes. Some are better than others, and this one I'm just kind of experimenting with, but that is what you see me doing here. And now using their metallic gold, I'm going in and giving some sunbeam sunset highlights into the water portion of this seascape. And once my paint is dry, I'm ready to start painting with resin. This is the fun part. So I'm using art resin today. It's a 1-to-1 ratio, part hardener, part resin. You mix equal parts. Make sure you stir it really good for a few minutes, scraping the bottom and sides of your mixing cup. And then once you've got it really good and mixed, I then pour out into smaller cups so that I can start dividing out my colors and begin painting. I'm using a variety of all powder pigments that I dip into my resin, and it takes very little powder pigment to resin ratio to get the beautiful opaque colors you see here. And then I always reserve clear resin because I might want to mix more colors later, and I also want to apply it over my board before I start putting in the colored pigment. So by applying a clear coat of resin over my painting, that way I preserve the paint underneath and keep some of the colors because I really do like it. And it also helps your resin move better on the board. If you see my other Seascape videos, you'll know that this is completely different than how I normally do a resin seascape. But it was more like I was painting my resin on instead of pouring it, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm thinking way ahead about some other ideas using this technique of more of painting with resin than pouring with resin. So you've got to stay tuned because my mind is like blown with this technique. And I really just loved the meditative quality of sitting here and just painting with my resin. And so here you can see where I've left it to cure. And then I removed that tape by just heating it up a little because it was really stuck under my resin. But look at that beautiful sharp line it created. It worked perfect. And you'll notice I never torched this portion because when you torch it, all of that paint moves, and I didn't want that movement. I wanted to keep it looking like this. But because I didn't torch it, there were bubbles in it, and I knew that was going to happen. And you simply just sand those bubbles out. Then I wipe it down with an alcohol wipe, and I'm ready to move on. And you won't even notice there were any bubbles there to begin with. And of course, you know me, I love sparkle. So I'm going to add a little bit of sparkle to my sunset seascape just to give it a little shine like you might see on the ocean in the water as the sun's setting over it. And then I went in with a little bit of acrylic paint just to give it a little bit of highlight. And now I'm ready to move on and pour my final clear coat of resin over the piece. If you enjoy watching these videos, it sure helps me out a lot if you hit that subscribe button. And if you ring that little notification bell, you'll know when I launch my next video. Now giving it a little bit of a good torching to pop any of those last minute little pesky bubbles, I set it aside to cure. So here's the final piece after it's cured. What do you guys think? Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. Should I create a bigger one? And as always, thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel. Happy creating, everyone!